Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to Build 2020. This is the Ask the Team session from the Microsoft Teams engineering group. Welcome to the Q&A session today. We're looking forward to hearing a bunch of questions from you, answering anything we can about the Teams platform, about how to build apps on Teams, how to be successful with partners and customers building on top of the platform. Hopefully we can give you a lot of insight into what's possible and how to start your journey using the Teams platform. Just before we get started, I'm going to provide a little bit of a overview of the session today and how things will pan out. In terms of what to expect, there's a few housekeeping items up front. We'll go through an introduction of the team and talk about who we are and who we're representing within the Teams engineering group. Then we'll open the forum to you, our customers and partners, to ask any questions of us. We'll do the best that we can to answer them based on our areas of expertise throughout engineering. Then hopefully we'll plug some of the gaps that you have regarding how to build and be successful inside Teams. In order to ask questions, please use the chat box in the top right of your screen. You can post anonymously or use your real name if you care to. Once questions are moderated and approved, they'll appear in the published list. Please use the upvote buttons to mark your interest in a particular question, just to help us self-moderate, and we'll move those to the top of the queue. Each of the subject matter experts that are on the call this morning will answer those questions verbally. Hopefully we'll get to the majority of them as we go through the session. Just a quick note on etiquette. This session will be recorded and will be available publicly sometime after the event. Please help us by just asking your questions once. As I said, we'll get to them if we have the time during the session. Please don't spam the chat. And lastly, just please make an effort to adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which is on the slide here. Microsoft expects all participants in our events, both digital and physical, to uphold these principles and be good digital citizens. Now to introduce the team. So I'm Clint Williams, I'm a Principal Program Manager. I lead our enterprise and non-regulated industry team who are working with partners to integrate their core workflows in the form of apps into Teams. If I didn't work in tech, I think I'd be a chef. I fancy myself as the next Gordon Ramsay in the kitchen, although my skills probably don't align with that. I'd like to introduce Adrian Solis. Adrian, over to you.
Hi everyone, this is Adrian. I'm an engineering manager here at Teams. My team and I, I lead a group of engineers who work with partners who are building apps for Microsoft Teams. And to answer this pithy question, if I didn't work in tech, I think I would be a medical doctor right now. I was actually on my way to a med school program before, I guess, computers caught my eye and I discovered my passion for tech.
Awesome, thanks Adrian. Next, I'd like to introduce Ted Griffin.
Hello everyone, I'm a designer at Microsoft Teams. I work on the platform. I help partners integrate into Teams and make their applications a reality in the collaborative context of Teams. If I wasn't in tech, I would be channeling my inner Matisse. I love to paint. I love to draw. These are things I like to do when I'm not working.
Awesome, thanks guys. Just in terms of what it takes to be, in terms of the types of questions that we're here to answer this morning, as I mentioned, I'm working with partners and customers, helping them to be successful in the Teams platform. So hopefully I can give some oversight around how we think about building apps, how we think about the workflows and scenarios that make the most sense. I can talk a little bit about the process that we go through with partners and customers to be successful in that area. Adrian can help with the developer aspects and how our developer community should think about approaching the Teams platform, can go deep on the specifics of our developer platform from an API perspective, and hopefully close some of the gaps that you have there. And Ted can help around how to design high quality apps, how to think about using the points of extensibility in a user-friendly way. So now we'll jump into some of the questions. I have a question to start, which I think is applicable to everyone on the panel this morning. How do you think about the process of building high quality apps in teams? So I guess I'll start with that one, and then we can go through each of the folks on the panel. The way that we think about working with partners in my area of the business when we start an engagement in the very early phases is to ask the partner to give us a demonstration and to talk about the high value scenarios that they see in their existing product, whether that's a web application or a native application, thinking through the scenarios and flows that an end user would go through on a daily basis to provide, or to get value from that particular product. So whether it's in a project management context, are they creating new tasks and assigning them to others? Are they going into a Kanban board and seeing all of the items that are assigned to them? We generally create a short list of what those high value scenarios are, and then we think through the points that make the most sense to bring inside teams. So the things that tap into that collaborative and productivity aspect of the extensibility platform that we have, trying to map them back to available capabilities. So does, in the case of assigning tickets to someone in a project management context, does that also lead to sending a notification to someone to tell them that there's been an item assigned to them? Those kinds of flows are really important, and thinking about how each scenario manifests itself inside teams. From there, we usually hand over to our colleagues in design, which I'm going to do now, and Ted would usually give us an overview of exactly how those flows work from a UX perspective, making sure that we're using the points of extensibility correctly. Over to you, Ted.
So once we identify those sweet spots, like when should this happen in Teams and when should this happen on a web portal or on your service, is the beautiful sweet spot of collaboration. And that's something we really want to emphasize with Teams, with all of our integrations. And so once we identify those sweet spots, we sort of rationalize, well, how does this surface? How does this render in Teams? What pieces of information do we need to carry over? And how does the user receive this sort of notification? Hey, I've been assigned something. How should they receive that? So we start looking at all the possible surfaces and teams, what makes sense to the users, and how can we sort of emulate what they're anticipating on this third-party or second-party service, and how we can carry that over into Teams and still keep that sense of familiarity.
Awesome, thanks, Ted. And then Adrian, once we hand the baton over to you as we get further into the process, how do you think about those steps? You're on mute, Adrian.
There we go. So I usually start by how the features have been mapped to the capabilities in Teams, because from there, there's usually prescribed implementation patterns for that. So like if the capability in use is a bot or a messaging extension, then it's pretty clear that my final architecture will have a bot in it somewhere. Similarly, with a tab or a task module, we kind of start to decide whether we need to implement that using a full-fledged web page that's then iframed inside Teams, or if there are task modules that would look or can be implemented with an adaptive card, for example. And so from there, we kind of get the idea of start getting the pieces of the high-level architecture together. So we know that there's going to be a bot, there's going to be a tab, then we look for what the data sources are and what the controls are around them. And then that would tell us whether we're going to end up needing authentication or authorization for certain capabilities. And then from there, I typically start with a base project, and we've released some extensions here at Build that can help with that. Just having something working in the ground from something simple that's working is very kind of validating for me as a developer, see it up and running. And then I iterate on that in sprints, adding more and more features, fleshing out what the scenarios that were called for from the application. And throughout this process, we try to involve users. We release betas pretty regularly so that we validate assumptions that this is a flow that does work for a typical user in the company or whatever scenario that we are targeting for this app.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. So another question, which I think is...
Do you want to talk about the app validation process after that?
Sure. So yeah, I think that's a good point, Adrian. Normally, in the previous session, we had Priya Koshi, who leads our validation and store ops team, who would talk about this process, but I can touch on it briefly. So in an instance where a partner wants to take their app through the full process of scenario envisioning, design, and development, normally the final stage in the evolution, I guess, of building on Teams is to publish those apps into the Teams app catalog. So both within the Teams product itself, but also within AppSource. So in order to do that, we have a team of validators who will go and use the app and test each of the capabilities to make sure that it's using the platform in a correct manner, that it's providing all of the minimum functionality that we require. So things like if you have a bot that is responsive or responds to commands or sends notifications to a user, it must provide a welcome message when it's first installed to explain the capabilities that it provides and give the user some sort of overview of what's possible. The team will go through and test each of the capabilities, making sure that it follows those guidelines, and I can drop some documentation into the chat window regarding this. They walk through each of those capabilities, making sure that it aligns to the validation policies that we have both within Teams and within Office as the broader organization. And all things going well, they'll come back with some feedback around suggested changes. Once those changes are completed, they'll sign off on the app, push publish, and within, I think, around 48 hours, the app will be live in the store. So customers can then go and choose to download it, install it, and start using it within the product. Feel free to jump in and ask any follow-up questions if anyone has any specifics about that process. Another question which I think is relevant to each of us on the panel this morning is around our favorite underused features of Teams. I actually had a similar question in the session yesterday. I'm going to start with the answer that I gave yesterday and try and find something to diversify a little bit. So for me, I think my favorite component that I see a lot of value for partners and customers with that I feel is not used enough is the messaging extension. So messaging extensions in Teams provide search capabilities. So going back to the project management example I gave earlier, it might be a situation where as a user, I want to search for all of the tickets that have been assigned to me or all of the work items I have to deliver this week. I can use a messaging extension which sits under the message box inside the Teams UI, allows me to search on keyword, for example, and find something, let's say, something to do with a bug to do with login. Search for that based on keywords, return a small snippet of information which I can then share in a chat or a channel context with my colleagues and start some collaboration. Perhaps if I'm asking for an update on that ticket or asking for some additional information, it just gives me a rich view of some of the information related to that item. I think that's one part that's underutilized. I think for me, the next part of messaging extensions, which I find most interesting, is what we call the create compose flow. And that allows an end user in Teams to go through a series of screens. So it may be that in this scenario, I'm creating a new project management task using a messaging extension. I can as a developer, present a screen that might have a form for an end user to fill in. So let's say title and description of the item. Once they've completed that, if I click next, I can be taken to a series of other screens, which can all be iframes. Let's say on the second screen, it might be assign this ticket to someone and set a severity and priority, that kind of thing. I think those being able to daisy chain those screens together is super valuable. It allows teams to be the central hub for productivity. It allows people to create tasks and complete end-to-end workflows inside the UI without having to pivot out to a project management application. I think that's super valuable, something that perhaps we're not talking to partners and customers about often enough, but I think it adds a lot of great capabilities into the product. Ted, I'll hand over to you to get your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth there. I was going to go with the create, compose flow as well, because that's a really nice way of keeping the user in the context of Teams while being able to create something new on a service that's away. And so bringing that into Teams is like super powerful and really just keeps you in the flow for your day-to-day. On top of that, there's also message actions, which can also invoke this sort of create and compose interaction where I have a message from a colleague. Hey, Ted, I need you to get this task done. I can take that message from the overflow and create a new task. And that'll invoke a form. I fill it out, set a due date, add it to some path and create, and then I can post a message, a response to the original message saying, hey, got it, made a task for myself. So that's another great way of keeping the user in context and creating from within Teams. Yeah, so I would go with those two.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. Adrian?
I used to say task modules, and maybe even now, because we still see apps that end up kind of calling out to a browser or displaying content in an external browser instead of within Teams. And I think initially I can understand. It's understandable because task modules were a bit finicky and hard to use, especially with authentication. But now with Tab SSO, which also works in task modules, I would encourage people to look into bringing more of your content within Teams and reducing the context switch inducing change to going out into a browser. The other thing that I feel is underused by apps is link unfurling. Personally, I actually use it a lot. And it's one of those nice features that you end up interacting with an app pretty seamlessly, because then, for example, I just paste a link to an Azure DevOps work item into a message, and instead of just seeing a URL, I can send a richer card with more information so that whoever is getting this message knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I end up using it a lot, but I feel like there's more apps could be taking advantage of this opportunity to enrich messaging.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. While we're on you, there's a question about, is it or will it be possible to build Teams apps with Visual Studio or C#, or is it only possible with JavaScript?
It's possible to build apps with C#. We are, so I think we currently released a Visual Studio code extension that generates the code for JavaScript. We are planning to release a similar extension for Visual Studio that will generate a starter code for you in C#. However, on GitHub or even in our documentation links, you can find samples to Teams apps written in C#. In fact, if you look at our current library of app templates, which are small apps that we've built that fulfill certain scenarios, those are for the most part written in C#. So you can see that you can use them as a basis for experimentation. Blazor, let me just answer that question. We haven't, if you don't mind.
Sure.
is something that we haven't explored looking integrating with as deeply. With the announcements here at Build, it's something definitely that our team will be looking at, releasing samples for development of Teams apps using Blazor.
Thanks, Adrian. There's a question here about, will we introduce a feature where you can send messages to yourself? It's not something that I've heard anyone talking about internally in terms of being on the roadmap. I'd be interested to hear about the use cases. If you can share some more information as a follow-up in the chat. Super interested to hear about new ideas, features, and functionality that we could add to the product. So please add some additional context and we can come back to that question. Sorry, Adrian, jump in.
Yeah, we actually heard about this a lot in our focus groups and various connections with people here at Build. And so just know that that suggestion has been heard and we are like kind of discussing it.
Awesome.
It's piqued our attention, like this idea or the number of requests that we're getting for this kind of bot or application.
Do you know what the use case is? Is that more for like a remind me later type scenario?
Yeah, it's a better featured version of what we used to have, which was Tbot. Which earlier you could just, it was just for help, but they want there were suggestions to repurpose that for like announcements or just sending messages to yourself, reminders, kind of like how a virtual assistant might be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Actually, again, a question for you. Why is there a timeout on event subscriptions and will this be extended or removed?
It's a good question. I'll need to ask the Graph folks for that. My theory is that processing these webhooks do require some additional processing. So we do want to make sure that it's still a relevant subscription. What our plans are for extending a timeout, I can't comment at this point. I'll have to ask.
Cool. A question that I can take around the app validation process that I spoke about earlier. What is the process of reviewing changes to an app that was already approved and published in the store? Is it periodic or someone could change everything once it has been approved? That's a good question. We hear this a lot from partners. Once they've shipped V1 of their app, they want to go and add new capabilities. So let's say they started with a bot and they want to go and add a tab, or even things like making changes to the metadata and the descriptions about their apps. Anytime that there's a change to the manifest, which is essentially at the core of what an app is in Teams, anytime that manifest changes, the app needs to go back through validation. And that's just for us to ensure that everything's working seamlessly end to end in the same way that it is for V2 as it was originally when it was published in the store. So by submitting that app package in Partner Center, we go back, it triggers a flow for our validation team to pick the app up again. They go through that the new app package and see if there's anything that's causing concern around the policies that we look at. The process itself is completed. The SLA for that team is around 24 hours, so super fast. It shouldn't be a bottleneck in getting a new version of your app out. Hopefully we can approve everything very quickly and get it back out into the hands of customers.
Can I add to that, Clint?
Sure, Adrian.
Yes, so not all changes will go through validation. Clearly, you still control your service, so you can push bug fixes and things like that without going through validation, because that won't require a change to the manifest that needs to be published. We do regularly do audit checks on apps, so we revalidate them periodically. And if we see things that validate our policies or egregious bugs, then we do reach out to developers to fix that. So if you see a blue an email out of the blue from our app submissions team, that might be why.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just to add to that, as Adrian said, the regression testing that we do happens on a very regular basis. We obviously have hundreds of apps in the ecosystem or published in the store now. We need to make sure that the quality bar remains as high as possible. Adrian, just another question for you. Can Teams apps be marked as desktop or mobile or both? Or is the expectation that all Teams apps work cross-platform?
Currently, no, not with the existing manifest. We expect Teams apps to, there's no way to mark a particular app as being, or a particular app or capability as being for desktop or mobile only. Now, as we start releasing or enabling more and more apps for mobile, we do see that there are some inconsistencies there. So the idea of being able to mark certain things as desktop or mobile only is something that we are strongly considering at this point. But we do encourage you though to make it to have your app work on both mobile and desktop. Like a lot of our users end up being mobile only, or the converse. I guess that's less frequent now in the world of mobile devices. But one of the things that we do see are apps that work perfectly on desktop, not on mobile. So when developing one, we highly encourage you to test and validate your app on mobile as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. I'm going to read this question. I hope I'm interpreting it correctly. Are there any plans to release a team API? We used to use Skype integrated with our Commando boxes to change our status when taking calls, but the option isn't there for Teams. I assume this relates to Presence API, if I'm understanding correctly, which will take your status in Teams, whether you're available, busy, online, on a call, etc. There is a Presence API which is in beta. I'm not exactly sure on the timeline around that going to GA, but certainly that'll give you that information now, so you should be able to use that in your apps or your products outside of Teams. One thing to call out there, which came up on yesterday's session, we often have, and you may have noticed, we have a lot of APIs that are in that beta state, particularly those that are in Graph. We, as a general rule, leave APIs in beta until we've been able to collect enough feedback and validation from customers and partners who are using those in their apps. The key call out here is we support those APIs in the same way, regardless of whether they're in beta or production. From a stability standpoint, from a SLA in terms of support and all those kinds of things, everything works exactly the same. We even see internal product groups using some of those beta APIs in their production apps, so they're completely fine to be used for those purposes, very stable. The main thing there is we leave the apps in that beta state in case we need to make changes. It just gives us the opportunity to make changes faster, and we don't need to provide the same amount of notice to those customers and partners who are consuming them. So bear that in mind. Definitely options for using those inside your apps as it is at the moment. Adrian, perhaps a question for you. Will Teams be WebView 2 based instead of the current Electron base? Could help with resource usage. It might be a bit of a curly one for you. Maybe more core product related than platform.
It's because right now Teams is like a Chromium based, Electron based app, and I guess the question is, are we switching to WebView 2? And the short answer is that I don't know. I haven't heard of plans to switch to WebView 2, but this is a question for core product.
Cool. Question now about some of the apps that we have published in the ecosystem. Are there further integrations with ServiceNow planned, like taking action on something in ServiceNow from Teams? So short answer to that is yes. We're currently working with ServiceNow on a iteration of their current app. We try and work with all of our strategic partners on a regular basis to add new capabilities and listen to our customers' needs and requests for additional capabilities and unlocking new scenarios. It'd be great to hear from you specifically around the use case that you have in mind for ServiceNow. It's probably one of our most requested integrations that we have in the ecosystem at the moment. Obviously adds a lot of value and really cements the core value of productivity, or Teams being the productivity hub, being able to create a new ServiceNow ticket without having to pivot out to an external application. So yeah, short answer is yes, new capabilities coming later in the year. If you have more information around your use case, more than happy to go a little bit deeper to that. Let me find another question. Any updates on installing / updating Teams? When can we get a full machine-wide installation to all audiences? Couldn't Teams use the same updater as the new Edge? I'm actually not sure how to answer that specifically. This is a part of, or there's a separate part of engineering responsible for the core product itself. The folks that are on the call this morning are more related to building on top of Teams and the platform components. We can certainly try and find some documentation around the future vision for that. I don't know whether it's something that we've announced at this point. Adrian, perhaps another question for you. Are there plans to implement a new version of the Skype Web SDK or similar that would support Teams?
Yes, that's something that we are currently working on. I don't think there's plans, there's concrete dates to share at this point, but it's on the roadmap. Yeah,
we hear that from a lot of customers, and looking forward to the interesting scenarios that could be opened up as a result of that SDK. Yeah, we have been for a while now. There's very compelling scenarios around it. Yeah. Could you give us an insider ring? Dev ring is very close to release preview. That's a good question. That one, I'd encourage going to user voice and voting on that. The closest public, the preview that we have would be, as you said, the public developer preview ring. Yep, I agree with that. Find something else. In the documentation for the Graph API's create message, there is a mention that it should not be used for data migration. Is there another recommended path that should be used for migration and or more heavily use of the APIs? Not right now. Again, I would suggest going to user voice and voting on that. It's also something that we've heard, prioritizing that. Your input would be good. Yeah, I agree. A question now about, will there be an NDI integration like in Skype? I was actually just searching for information. I thought I had heard something over the last few days about that. There is NDI support coming for Teams, although certainly not an expert in that particular area. Let me grab a link to an article that's been published in the last few days, and hopefully that will answer your question. If you have any follow-ups, please jump in and post another reply. Will it eventually be possible to download Teams from the Microsoft Store? That's a good question. I actually don't know. I assume by the Microsoft Store, that's the in Windows App Store. It's a really good question. I haven't heard anyone talk about that internally. I actually didn't even realize that it wasn't available in there at the moment. So interesting question. We can try and get some information and come back to you during the call to answer that. Adrian, perhaps a question for you. Last time I checked, it was not possible to use adaptive cards for preview of cards in Teams. Is it available now? when using messaging extension with cards, it's weird to have to use a hero card as the preview of an adaptive card.
Nope, still not possible. I think the constraint there is that there's the preview is in a pretty fixed format, like an image, title, and description, whereas adaptive cards don't have that, don't enforce that schema. So you control the content of an adaptive card, and it's more free form than that. Whereas heroes and thumbnails have a defined like title, subtitle, image fields. That's why we can't infer what the preview would look like for an adaptive card, which is why we're asking you to provide it as a hero or thumbnail. So think of it as an opportunity to kind of distill the information that's in your adaptive card in a way that can be previewed in that smaller space that we have in the search messaging extension flyout.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Here's an interesting question from Jamie. What does Microsoft call a team in Microsoft Teams? Is it a Teams team? So confusing. Yes, I completely agree. Constantly introducing myself as someone who works on the Microsoft Teams team, and it's a bit of a tongue twister. We didn't do ourselves any favors with the name of the product. So to answer your question, yes, we do call it a team internally. It becomes quite confusing, but you get used to it, even though I think we sound like we're talking in riddles a lot of the time. Adrian, maybe another developer-specific question for you. Could you add an API and tooling to automate the sideload of an application from a CI/CD pipeline? It would be really necessary when a manifest is changing and I want to automatically update the manifest in my test environment.
Yeah, this is another one of the requests that we heard a lot here at Build. And so it's that feedback is loud and clear, and we are considering it.
Awesome. Question about live events, which obviously we're using today. Why can only one user share their screen at a time? When testing yesterday, we found if anyone shared a screen, it would automatically stop another person's screen share. Kind of negates the producer role if presenters can change what is displayed to the attendees. So great feedback. This is something that's more for the calling and meetings team within engineering. My suggestion here is to go to user voice and enter that as an item. If others feel the same way and the feedback's mutual across the community, I'm sure it'll get upvoted and the team will definitely act on that. As I said previously, with integrations in the ecosystem, we're also iterating on the whole product in terms of capabilities and features and continuing to add new things on a regular basis. So certainly we're looking out for signals like that from users in our customer base and trying to make sure that we close any gaps that people highlight. Are there any boot camps or training with workshops and labs planned for partners to increase their knowledge of Teams app development? Adrian, what would you suggest is the best way for a partner to get up to speed with how to build inside Teams?
We actually released some learning modules and improved them for Teams app development. I'll try to find the links to them and post them as a response to the question. Yeah, if not, then online later on. I think that is, we've been missing that for a while, and we now have it. Another good resource would be our list of app templates, where you can see how we have implemented certain features, and then also looking at some of our samples, especially the bot builder samples, where they go into detail for how to implement certain scenarios in bots. Clint, are there any workshops that you know of, like that we are offering in the near future?
I don't think there's anything scheduled in the near term. Certainly the Teams developer social channels is probably the best way to stay on top of those events as we schedule them. They do happen from time to time. It's something we're definitely considering, continuing, to invest in. So there will be some on the horizon. I'm just not clear exactly when they're planned.
This last
Adrian,
year, we did do certain workshops, right, for developers and partners.
Yes, I think there is some plans to roll out similar events globally to help our partners, regardless of location, over the next year. Question just disappeared. Let me just find it. Can you describe how you test applications developed in Teams? So I guess there's two parts to this, perhaps. As a developer, Adrian, how do you go about testing? And then I'll touch a little bit more on how the validation team go about their testing and how they look at that process end to end.
In many ways, like a Teams app is a web service. So it's if there's a bot, there's going to be a bot endpoint. If there's a tab, there's a web app running it. So for us, when I've developed an app, I start with a good suite of unit tests for the functionality. I try to stay away from testing the bot or the web app directly. There are times when that becomes unavoidable, like testing an actual flow with a bot, in which case we've used direct line to script the interaction with the bot, and then web app testing tools like Protractor, we've used that for testing tabs. Internally also, we end up deploying multiple versions of a bot. So like once something's passed, like the basic suite of tests, we would deploy that internally to a dev endpoint, do some validation there, run some scenario tests on it, and then kind of promote those through PP before a production endpoint then.
Awesome. And just to touch on the process that the validation team go through when they test an application, one of the things that they request as part of that validation is a series of test cases. So explaining what the desired results, each of the platform capabilities, making sure that they understand the specific flows that you've included in your app and looking at things through the perspective of an end user. They ask for a number of different testing accounts be set up on your existing service so they can log in with multiple users, both individually and at the same time, to go through those flows and understand how two users would see, let's say, a messaging extension flow, how from a collaborative standpoint is that being reflected for both users. So making sure that those test cases are accurate, detailed, and clearly that they clearly explain the flows is super important in that process. And although there's some effort involved up front, obviously, in creating those test cases, it means that the process is much more efficient, and hopefully that means that your app gets published into the store faster. A follow-up question, or sorry, an unrelated question about a sandbox for testing Teams functionality. We just created a test team, and then they have channels, but it's a permanent part of our org. Due to all the back-end things that get spun out as part of a team, is there a cleaner way to test things? Yes, the way that we suggest our partners and customers test their integrations in Teams is to actually just spin up a Microsoft 365 developer tenant, and you can create one of those freely. I'll grab the link and pop it in the channel. Essentially, that allows you to spin up a unique tenant that would just be used for your testing purposes. I think we give you 20 or 25 seats of individual users that can log into that tenant. The tenant itself will last for 90 days with let's say you spin up the tenant and don't use it, it'll last for 90 days and then it'll expire. If it's used on a regular basis for development, it will continue to renew indefinitely. So that's probably the best suggestion I have for spinning up a sandbox environment. Adrian, Ted, anything to add to that? Nope. Let me get the link and I'll drop it in the chat. Adrian, this is perhaps a question for you. Is there an alternative to using ngrok when developing Teams apps in order not to have to change ngrok URL all the time in the manifest? It's needed to use the paid version of ngrok, have a fixed custom ngrok domain.
Yeah, check out this tool that we have called Tunnel Relay that uses an Azure resource to do something similar to what ngrok does. And if you do that, that gives you a stable URL that doesn't change when you restart.
Awesome.
So that project is called Tunnel Relay on GitHub.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. Question about, will we be able to archive channels or teams? So at the moment, you can archive teams, and there's Graph APIs to do that if you want to do it in a programmatic way. Currently, there's no functionality that allows you to archive just specific channels. It's something that we've heard before, something that's certainly in our backlog. I don't know that we have a timeline for when we'll ship that. Adrian, maybe another question for you. Could you share some sample Azure CLI, PowerShell, ARM template on how to automate the creation of the app registration correctly configured to use Teams tab SSO? Easy to do it manually in the Azure portal, but not trivial to automate that when provisioning Azure resources using infrastructure as code. I see Patrick had provided some links to documentation. Maybe that answers the question correctly.
I think the ask is for an ARM template, right, or some script that can automate this, and we'll take that into consideration. It's a good suggestion, and you're right that it involves multiple steps, easy to screw up in a production or if you do it manually. So having an ARM template or a script to do it would be a good idea, or even just a manifest for like the raw JSON manifest for an AAD app correctly configured for tab SSO. I'm taking down that suggestion.
Yeah, and what I was suggesting in the answer, yeah, so the answer I was suggesting is before we provide an ARM template, there's always something you can do, which is whatever operation you do manually in the Azure portal, you can export a template out of it. So if you've done it manually once, you can export the template and use that as a basis for automation via the Azure CLI.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. Are there plans to allow moving a channel from one team to another? This is something I've heard before. I've heard it from customers on a number of occasions. This is something that I don't have a timeline on, or even whether there's a commitment on the plan, but this is the type of thing I suggest going to user voice and creating an item for that. Hopefully the rest of the customer base will upvote it and the priority will be lifted internally. Let me find something else. Will bots or apps be allowed to participate in private channels? So yes, short answer. They will. I don't know whether we have specific timelines around whether those capabilities, like when those capabilities will be available, but yes, it's something that's coming in the near term. We aim to have all of the same capabilities that exist in public channels, in private channels in the near term. Renaming a channel does not rename the underlying SharePoint document library, which is annoying. yes, we agree. Are there plans to fix this? I know, again, this is a topic I've heard discussed internally. Adrian, I'm not sure if you have any feedback or guidance around the best way to handle this.
I haven't heard of plans to change the name of the folder when the channel is changed. This used to be pretty bad for apps because there wasn't a way to link the channel to the associated files folder. But now we've released an API that will let you get the name of the folder through Graph for a channel. So hopefully that alleviates some of this pain. It's still a bit unsightly if you go to the theme folder on the web and you can see the folder for a channel on the web and you can see the old name. But from the API's point of view, I hope that what we've delivered here helps at least with this use case.
Thanks, Adrian. Wiki has a lot of potential. Are there plans to make it a more robust piece of the platform? It seems like it's very limited. No printing, no moving, no exporting. Again, this is something I'm not super familiar with. It's part of a different part of Teams engineering who's responsible for that. I haven't heard any plans about the next evolution of Wiki or whether that's something that they're planning. Like I mentioned at the start, we work mostly with our third-party developers who are building on the platform. There's certainly a number of options out there in the ecosystem that could take up the place of Wiki if you wanted to move to one of those solutions. Suggest that you go and browse the ecosystem and see what's possible to close that gap if you feel the Wiki tool that's available in the core product isn't living up to your expectations. Adrian, another question about testing. I'm a manual tester. I'm trying to move into a more automated tester role for web applications. Can you use Teams to build web applications? What type of testing can you do in Teams? I think you touched on some of these areas in your previous answer.
I think the question here, Clint, is like how might you, or what kinds of applications in Teams you might be able to build that do web testing, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like you could be right.
Have you encountered partners who are using apps in Teams for that use case? Maybe you have some scenarios that you've encountered.
I haven't actually. It is a super interesting use case. I haven't come across any partners that we've worked with that are building in that space. Certainly something to look into. There's a PM on my team that kind of owns that space all up, but there's no third-party partners that I'm aware of that have shipped anything at this point. Last year or so, there was a home tab for Teams on mobile, which was teased like Staff Hub had. Is it still on track? Will it be? When will it be available? As far as I'm aware, there's nothing in the pipe for a home tab on mobile. I think perhaps the closest thing is really the app menu. I can't remember what the official name is for it internally, but the ability to scroll up from the bottom of the UI on mobile and surface all of the apps that you have installed on a personal basis within Teams. That's perhaps the closest thing. There are some new capabilities which are coming very soon if we haven't shipped them already around personal apps in Teams. I guess you could use that as an app home, but it would be specific to an individual app. Rather than to a combination of apps, if I'm understanding the ask correctly here. Any of you guys on the call have any feedback or additional information to add to that? No. Adrian, question for you. Can Teams be used to log into proprietary software? I assume this is a question about SSO perhaps, being able to bind the login for one product with Teams?
It's a pretty general question.
It is.
I guess the short answer is yes, because we do log in. There are apps that log into things like Atlassian or Trello or have Google logins. So the short answer is yes, but of course that depends on what the system that you're logging into exposes. So like if they have an OAuth flow, then it would be that certainly makes it easier to build an app that can integrate with that system.
Yep. A question about granular permissions and resource-specific consent. When will they be in beta and/or GA? I know that we made a number of announcements about these during build this week. I'm not super clear on the timelines for those. I believe the GA date is sometime in the summer this year. So certainly some sessions where we mentioned that. One that I know, which you can watch on demand, was by Nick Kramer, who's one of the PMs responsible for Graph in the team, talk through an example using Zapier, who's one of the new platform partners that we have. So yeah, my suggestion there is that they're coming in the summer timeframe this year. Looks like we're nearly at time. Let me find one last question. Ted, question for you. From a design perspective, what do you say are the most important aspects to consider when building an app for teams?
Collaboration. It's got to be collaborative. And my God, I mean, it's such a broad question. But I guess I'll just give a broad answer. It needs to be collaborative, and your app needs to make itself relevant somehow. So be it proactive notifications from a bot or some sort of notification. Generally speaking, it needs to be collaborative. I need to be able to share something from this product with someone else that I work with. I need to be able to promote something from this product in a channel. I need to be able to create something new in Teams. All of these things are like touchstones, fundamental to a successful application in Teams. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. So we're at time. Like to close out the session now. Thank everyone for their participation. Had some really interesting questions this morning. Hopefully we've been able to give you some accurate guidance on how to think about building apps for teams. Hopefully we've been able to answer your questions about the core product and what's coming in the future. Really appreciate everyone's participation and your constant stream of questions during this session. Look forward to hopefully seeing you publish apps on Teams in the near term. Here's a link for a survey which we'd appreciate you could fill out just to give us some information about how you think the session went, what we could do to improve for subsequent sessions in the future. There's a link to the Teams developer docs if you want to go and explore what's possible on the platform, and mybuild.microsoft.com if you want to go back to the main part of the site, find your next session to consume. Thanks again for your participation. Goodbye.